What would you say if I told you a doctor invented a vaccine worth $7 billion but didn't see a single penny? That he tested his experimental drug on his own children? That his vaccine would go on to save the lives of millions of people? But that it would also lay the foundation of skepticism towards the government that would last for well over 70 years? Well, that doctor is real. His name is Dr. Jonas Salk, and this is his unbelievable story. Jonas Salk was born in 1914 in New York City to his Russian Jewish immigrant parents. He was a brilliant student, which shouldn't come as a surprise because you know that Russian Jewish immigrant doctors in New York City always get the job done. He breezed through school ahead of schedule before getting into the highly competitive City College of New York at just 15 years old, and eventually NYU School of Medicine. It was here Jonas came face to face with actual patients and came to realize he didn't like treating them. He didn't want to treat a single patient. In contrast, he wanted to treat millions. After completing his residency, Jonas was faced with a dilemma. The year was 1941 and America had entered World War II. As a medical professional, he was given a choice between enlisting in the war effort or staying home to pursue a scientific task. He thought, why not both? So he worked alongside Dr. Thomas Francis at the University of Michigan, where they developed a successful vaccine for the flu, saving countless lives of soldiers fighting on the frigid front line. After success with one virus, he quickly set his sights on a new one, polio. Poliomyelitis, or polio for short, can be absolutely brutal. You see, most people who contract polio won't have any physical symptoms, but not everyone is that lucky. Others will develop flu-like symptoms that could clear up on their own, or lead to the development of meningitis, or even worse, develop paralysis and death. In fact, polio wasn't a new virus. It was around for thousands of years, mysteriously paralyzing people and forcing sufferers to walk with canes like in these Egyptian hieroglyphs. In the early 1900s, polio cases in New York surged, leading to nationwide panic. And as we all know with panic, snake oil cures are sure to follow. Thank God TikTok wasn't around back then though. People tried all sorts of remedies like earthworm oil and blackberry brandy. Rumors spread about the benefits of ox blood, so New York families actually waited outside of slaughterhouses with empty buckets. Doctors experimented on patients by draining spinal fluid from children while injecting their veins with salt solutions. The treatments weren't just ineffective, but oftentimes deadly, killing patients instead of saving them. Polio could strike anyone at any time, and in the 1920s, it struck the wrong man. Future American President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who soon found himself confined to a wheelchair. Polio cases soared by over 700% between 1938 and 1943. Something had to be done. Research and development for a cure, or at least a vaccine, was just desperately needed. But with a nation climbing out of the depths of a depression and a second world war on the way, who was gonna foot that bill? Well, FDR answered the call and launched the March of Dimes, a national drive for people to send in their pocket change to aid in polio research. Movie stars like Eddie Cantor promoted it far and wide, as did American sweetheart Shirley Temple. The thought was everyone in America, no matter how rich or how poor, could spare a dime, and boy did they. What resulted was basically the greatest Kickstarter campaign in history. Men, women, and especially children furiously donated their pocket change. In just the first 3 days of the campaign, 200,000 letters and 2.6 million dimes were received by the White House. The campaign was such a success, America put FDR's face on the dime itself. With millions in the government's pockets, FDR now had one question: where and how should he spend the money? Like a Hollywood agent looking to sign the next big movie star, the government started asking, who's the next big name in virology? It didn't take long for Jonas Salk's name to emerge as a leading candidate to head polio research, and so the funding came. Jonas was granted millions to build state-of-the-art facilities, purchase cutting-edge equipment, and recruit a team of virologists unlike any the world had ever seen. Jonas Salk became the Nick Fury of medicine, assembling his own team of Avengers aimed at one thing: making polio, the Thanos of diseases, disappear. Jonas and his team got to work devoting every waking hour and resource available for years to the task. But Jonas wasn't alone. Funding had also gone to a scientist named Dr. Albert Sabin, who'd built out his own team and department committed to ending polio. Sort of like the Justice League to Salk's Avengers. The two doctors, however, had different approaches. Dr. Sabin was attempting to create a vaccine using a live sample of polio, meaning a patient would ingest a living, but weakened, form of the virus in the hopes the body would be able to beat the weak virus and build up immunity, similar to treatments that we've used for other diseases like smallpox. Jonas was skeptical. By ingesting a live version of polio, yes, your body could develop immunity, but also you run the risk of the virus getting stronger and killing you, especially if you're immunocompromised. To Jonas, it seemed like too great of a risk. Instead, he wanted to develop a killed or inactivated vaccine, which was much less likely to infect you because, well, it was already dead. Salk and Sabin's teams worked neck and neck in the wake of World War II, but they were running out of time. In 1943, there were 10,000 cases of polio in the US. By 1952, there were 59,000. According to a national poll, polio was the second biggest fear for Americans, behind only the atomic bomb. But Jonas wasn't afraid. He was determined. He logged long nights, fumed over failed tests, cried for more funding, actually put the government into debt, but eventually Jonas made progress. Finally, Salk had a version of his vaccine he felt confident in, and to prove its efficacy, he eventually decided to test it on the things he cared about most: his own wife and children. One night after coming home from work, Jonas lined his wife and 3 young sons up in the kitchen. They stood there and watched him sterilize needles over the flame of the stove. One by one, Jonas injected his family with his own polio vaccine, which is an incredible risk to take with your own flesh and blood. But luckily, it worked. Yes. What followed became the largest medical test in history at the time, where 1.8 million polio pioneers tested the vaccine, guided by Jonas and his former